My sister Bethany stood up at our family reunion dinner, champagne glass raised, and announced that she was officially taking over our late grandmother's estate management because I was clearly too immature and financially irresponsible to handle it. 43 relatives nodded in agreement. I smiled, pulled out my phone, and started taking notes. What they did not know was that I had been documenting everything for months, and tonight's performance was exactly the evidence I needed. Before we dive into how I turned my sister's public humiliation into her ultimate downfall, drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from. This family revenge story gets wild, so hit that like button and subscribe because you will not want to miss how this unfolds. Trust me, the justice served at the end will leave you speechless. My name is Delilah Hartwell, and until 6 months ago, I believed my sister Bethany was the golden child who could do no wrong. She had always been the responsible one, the one our parents trusted with important family matters. When our grandmother Eleanor passed away last year, leaving behind a substantial estate worth nearly $2 million, it seemed natural that Bethany would help manage things while the will went through probate. Grandmother Eleanor had been very specific in her will. The estate was to be divided equally among all her grandchildren with a special trust fund established for education expenses for the great-grandchildren. She had worked her entire life as a seamstress and then a successful boutique owner, carefully saving every penny. Her house, her savings, her investments, and her life insurance were meant to secure our family's future for generations. The first red flag appeared 3 months after the funeral when I went to visit grandmother's house to collect some personal mementos. Bethany had assured everyone that the property was being maintained properly while we waited for probate to close. But when I arrived, I found the house completely empty. Not just empty of furniture, but stripped down to the fixtures. Even the copper plumbing had been removed. When I called Bethany in panic, she calmly explained that she had decided to liquidate non-essential assets to prevent deterioration and theft. She said she had moved everything to a secure storage facility and that the house renovations were necessary to maintain property value. She even had documentation invoices from moving companies and renovation contractors. Everything looked legitimate on the surface, but something felt wrong. I remembered grandmother's antique collection, her hand-carved furniture that had been in our family for generations, her extensive library of first-edition books. These were not things that should be sitting in a storage unit. When I asked to visit the storage facility, Bethany became defensive, claiming it was not safe and that insurance policies prohibited unauthorized access. That weekend, I decided to do some investigating. I drove to the 3 storage facilities in our area, describing the furniture to managers. None of them had any record of Bethany renting units or storing furniture matching those descriptions. When I checked with the renovation contractors listed on Bethany's invoices, 2 of the companies had never heard of our family, and one had been out of business for over a year. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. I discovered that Bethany had been named as the temporary executor of the estate, which gave her access to grandmother's bank accounts for maintenance and administrative purposes. Bank records which I obtained through my cousin Marcus, who worked at the credit union, showed a pattern of systematic withdrawals. Over $50,000 had been transferred out in increments just small enough to avoid triggering automatic bank reviews. The money trail led to several concerning discoveries. Bethany had purchased a new luxury car, paid off her credit card debt, and made a down payment on a vacation home in Florida. When confronted with these findings, she had explanations for everything. The car was a necessary business expense for her new consulting job. The credit cards had been paid off using her inheritance advance that she had negotiated with the estate lawyers. The Florida property was an investment opportunity that would benefit the entire family. But the most devastating discovery came when I found emails between Bethany and our cousin Rachel. They had been planning this systematic theft for months, beginning even before grandmother had passed away. The emails detailed their strategy for manipulating the family, isolating me specifically because they knew I would ask questions and creating false documentation to cover their tracks. In one email, Bethany wrote, "Delilah has always been the nosy one. We need to make sure everyone sees her as unstable and irresponsible before she figures out what we are doing. Start spreading stories about her financial problems and poor judgment. By the time probate closes, no one will believe anything she says." Rachel had responded with equal calculation. I can get Marcus to accidentally mention at Sunday dinner that Delilah asked him about gambling addiction resources. Plant the seed that she has been struggling with money management. Also, I noticed she has been quieter at family gatherings lately. We can spin that as guilt or depression. These emails revealed a sophisticated campaign of character assassination that had been unfolding for months. Every family gathering where relatives made subtle comments about my spending habits or asked if I was doing okay financially had been orchestrated. Every time someone suggested that Bethany should keep an eye on things because I was going through a difficult time had been part of their master plan. The final piece of evidence came from grandmother's neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who had watched suspicious activity at the house for weeks after the funeral. She had seen large trucks removing furniture in the middle of the night, had witnessed Bethany and Rachel loading boxes into rental vans, and had even taken photos because she thought burglars were targeting the empty property. Mrs. Patterson's photos clearly showed Bethany directing the removal of grandmother's belongings, including the antique dining set that had been featured in a magazine article about historical furniture preservation. These were not items going to storage for protection. They were being sold to private collectors and antique dealers. Armed with this evidence, I realized that the dinner confrontation had not been spontaneous. Bethany had planned to publicly discredit me at the family reunion because she knew I was getting close to uncovering the truth. By positioning herself as the responsible family member who was protecting everyone from my supposed instability, she was creating a narrative that would make it impossible for me to challenge her actions without seeming vindictive or delusional. The morning after the disastrous family dinner, I woke up with absolute clarity about what needed to happen next. Bethany's public humiliation of me had actually been a gift, though she did not realize it yet. She had revealed her strategy completely, showing the entire family exactly how she intended to maintain control of the narrative. More importantly, she had done it in front of witnesses who could later testify about her behavior and statements. I spent the next week organizing all my evidence into a comprehensive case file. Bank records, email printouts, photographs from Mrs. Patterson, documentation of the fake invoices, and recordings of my conversations with the storage facilities and contractors. Everything was meticulously organized and backed up in multiple locations, but I knew that evidence alone would not be enough. Bethany had spent months building her reputation as the responsible family member while systematically destroying mine. I needed to not only prove her guilt, but also demonstrate that her accusations against me were part of a deliberate fraud scheme. My first strategic move was to contact a forensic accountant recommended by my lawyer friend Jessica Monroe. Margaret Thompson had specialized in financial fraud cases for over 20 years and had worked with families dealing with estate theft. When I showed her my evidence, her reaction was immediate and professional. "This is one of the most systematic cases of family financial abuse I have seen," Margaret told me during our first meeting. "The pattern is textbook isolate. The potential whistleblower create false narratives about their credibility, maintain detailed false documentation to muddy the waters, and establish themselves as the trustworthy family protector. Your sister and cousin have essentially committed multiple felonies." Margaret agreed to conduct a complete forensic analysis of the estate finances, including tracing where the stolen money had actually gone. She also recommended that I document any future interactions with family members to establish their current beliefs about the situation and about my credibility. This advice led to my second strategic decision. Instead of confronting family members directly about Bethany's lies, I would give them opportunities to reveal what they had been told and how they perceived the situation. I started calling relatives individually, ostensibly to clear the air after the dinner incident and to understand their concerns about my fitness to handle estate matters. These conversations were illuminating and heartbreaking in equal measure. My Aunt Caroline told me that Bethany had confided that I had been asking relatives for money and that she was worried I might have a gambling problem. My cousin David mentioned that Rachel had expressed concern about my increasingly erratic behavior and had suggested that I might need professional help. Uncle Robert, whom I had always been close to, gently suggested that I might want to consider that Bethany's offer to handle the estate was actually an act of love, protecting me from responsibilities I might not be ready for. He mentioned that several family members had noticed I seemed overwhelmed and financially stressed lately. Each conversation revealed another layer of the systematic campaign Bethany and Rachel had been running. They had not just stolen money, they had stolen my reputation, my relationships, and my standing in the family. But these conversations also gave me something valuable, a clear record of what lies had been spread and who had been influenced by them. Margaret's forensic analysis confirmed my worst suspicions and revealed additional crimes I had not discovered. The total theft exceeded $120,000 when including the value of the furniture and antiques that had been sold. But more shocking was the discovery that Bethany had also been forging grandmother's signature on financial documents during the last months of her life. These forged documents suggest that the theft actually began while your grandmother was still alive, Margaret explained. There are investment withdrawals and insurance policy changes that your grandmother never would have authorized. This transforms the case from simple estate theft to elder abuse and fraud. The evidence was overwhelming, but I still needed a strategy for exposing the truth in a way that would restore my credibility and ensure that justice was served. Margaret recommended bringing in a private investigator to gather additional evidence and to verify the current location of the stolen assets. Private investigator David Walsh proved to be exactly what we needed. A former police detective with experience in white-collar crime, David was able to track down the buyers of grandmother's antiques and confirm the current status of the stolen money. His investigation revealed that Bethany and Rachel had been far more sophisticated in their operation than I had initially realized. They had established a fake estate liquidation company complete with business registration and bank accounts to create the appearance of legitimate transactions. Grandmother's antiques had been sold through this company to collectors in 3 different states with profits deposited into accounts that Bethany controlled. The fake renovation invoices were actually payments to themselves for estate management services. David also discovered that this was not their first time running such a scheme. 3 years earlier, they had used a similar approach when Rachel's grandfather had passed away, though on a smaller scale. That case had never been investigated because the family had accepted Rachel's explanations and had been grateful that she had handled everything during a difficult time. But David's most important discovery was that Bethany and Rachel were already planning their next target, our elderly great-aunt Miriam, who had recently been diagnosed with early-stage dementia. David had uncovered emails discussing strategies for gaining access to Aunt Miriam's finances and manipulating her into signing legal documents. This revelation changed everything. We were not just dealing with a completed crime. We were racing to prevent an ongoing pattern of elder abuse. The stakes had escalated far beyond recovering stolen inheritance money. We were potentially saving Aunt Miriam from becoming their next victim. Margaret recommended that we now had sufficient evidence to involve law enforcement, but she also suggested a strategic approach that would maximize our chances of both criminal prosecution and civil recovery. Rather than going to the police immediately, she recommended that we first confront Bethany and Rachel directly, but in a controlled environment where their responses would be recorded and witnessed. If we can get them to admit to the theft, or to make statements that contradict their documented lies, it will make the criminal case much stronger, Margaret explained. But more importantly, if they believe they can still control the narrative, they might reveal the location of assets that have not yet been discovered. This advice led to my decision to organize a family meeting under the pretense of resolving our differences and moving forward together. I would invite all the key family members, including those who had been influenced by Bethany's lies, and I would present my evidence in a calm, professional manner that demonstrated my stability and competence. But I also planned a surprise that Bethany would not see coming. Unknown to her, Margaret and David would be present as professional witnesses, and the entire meeting would be recorded with high-quality equipment that would capture every word and reaction. The meeting was scheduled for the following Sunday at Uncle Robert's house, the same location where many of our family gatherings had taken place over the years. I told everyone that I wanted to address the concerns that had been raised about my ability to handle family financial matters, and that I had prepared a comprehensive presentation that would hopefully put everyone's minds at ease. Bethany's immediate response to the meeting invitation was telling. She tried to postpone it, suggesting that emotions were still too high and that we should wait a few more weeks. When I insisted that the uncertainty was causing stress for everyone and needed to be resolved quickly, She demanded to know exactly what I planned to discuss and who else would be attending. Rachel was even more resistant, claiming that she did not think such a meeting would be productive and that it might actually make family relationships worse. She suggested that perhaps Bethany and I should meet privately first to work things out before involving everyone else. Their resistance confirmed that they knew their scheme was vulnerable to scrutiny. They had been counting on maintaining control of when and how any family discussions about the estate would happen. A formal meeting with evidence and witnesses was exactly what they had been working to prevent. The week leading up to the family meeting became a chess game of strategic maneuvering that would determine whether justice would be served or whether Bethany and Rachel would successfully maintain their fraud. Every conversation, every family interaction, every piece of evidence gathered during this time would prove crucial to the final outcome. My first priority was securing allies within the family who could help validate my evidence and serve as credible witnesses. This was challenging because Bethany and Rachel had spent months systematically undermining my credibility, but I had one significant advantage. I was telling the truth, and the truth has a way of revealing itself when examined closely. I started with my cousin Marcus, who worked at the credit union and had already seen some of the suspicious financial activity. Marcus had been uncomfortable with some of the transactions he had witnessed, but had assumed there were legitimate explanations. When I showed him the complete financial analysis that Margaret had prepared, his reaction was immediate and angry. "I should have questioned this months ago," Marcus told me, reviewing the documented pattern of transfers and withdrawals. These transactions violated several of our normal protocols, but Bethany kept saying everything had been approved by the estate lawyers. "I trusted her because she is family, but this is clearly systematic theft." Marcus agreed to provide official documentation of all the financial transactions and to attend the family meeting as a witness. His presence would be particularly powerful because he was the family member most people trusted with financial matters, and his professional expertise would carry significant weight. My next ally was Mrs. Patterson grandmother's neighbor. When I explained the full scope of what I had discovered, she was eager to help. Mrs. Patterson had been grandmother's close friend for over 30 years and had been deeply disturbed by the suspicious activity she had witnessed after the funeral. "Your grandmother trusted Bethany completely," Mrs. Patterson told me sadly. Eleanor would talk about how proud she was that Bethany was so responsible and successful. She would be heartbroken to know that her trust was being betrayed like this. "I am absolutely willing to testify about what I saw and to provide these photographs as evidence." But my most unexpected ally emerged from within Bethany's own circle. Rachel's younger sister Monica reached out to me 3 days before the scheduled meeting. Monica had overheard a phone conversation between Bethany and Rachel where they discussed strategies for discrediting my evidence and maintaining family support. "They were talking about you like you were their enemy instead of their sister," Monica told me during a tense coffee shop meeting. "Rachel was coaching Bethany on how to cry during the family meeting and how to make it seem like you were attacking her out of jealousy. But what really bothered me was when Rachel said that if this plan failed, they might need to accelerate the timeline with Aunt Miriam." Monica's information was devastating. Not only did it reveal that Bethany and Rachel knew about my investigation and were preparing counter-strategies, but it also confirmed that they were actively planning to victimize Aunt Miriam if their current scheme was exposed. Monica agreed to secretly record any future conversations she had with Rachel about the situation and to provide testimony about what she had already overheard. Her willingness to betray her own sister to protect our elderly aunt demonstrated the severity of the moral line that Bethany and Rachel had crossed. As word of the upcoming family meeting spread, I began receiving calls from relatives expressing various levels of concern, confusion, and curiosity. These conversations revealed just how successfully Bethany and Rachel had manipulated family perceptions, but they also showed that many family members had their own doubts and questions about the situation. Aunt Caroline admitted that she had been wondering why the estate settlement was taking so long and why she had not received any official updates from the lawyers. Uncle Robert confessed that he had been surprised by some of Bethany's recent purchases and had wondered how she could afford such expensive items on her salary. Cousin Jennifer mentioned that she had thought it was strange that no family members had been allowed to visit grandmother's house or to see the stored belongings. Each of these conversations revealed that Bethany's control of the narrative was not as complete as she had believed. Family members had been having private doubts and questions, but they had not shared them with each other because Bethany had created an atmosphere where questioning her decisions seemed disloyal or hurtful. David Walsh continued his investigation during this crucial week and made several additional discoveries that would prove essential to our case. He found evidence that Bethany had been researching legal strategies for defending against estate fraud accusations, including consulting with lawyers about how to claim that stolen assets had been gifted by the deceased before their death. Even more troubling, David discovered that Bethany had recently opened new bank accounts in different states and had been transferring money out of her existing accounts. This suggested that she was preparing to hide assets or potentially flee if the family meeting did not go as planned. Margaret Thompson used this new information to obtain court orders that would freeze Bethany's assets and prevent her from moving money during the investigation. This legal action had to be done secretly to avoid alerting Bethany before the family meeting, but it ensured that stolen funds could not disappear if she realized her scheme was collapsing. The most dramatic development of the week came when David's investigation uncovered evidence that Bethany had been in contact with individuals who specialized in helping people disappear and start new lives in other countries. Email records showed that she had been researching how to obtain false identification documents and how to transfer money to offshore accounts. This discovery transformed our understanding of the situation completely. Bethany was not just a family member who had made some poor financial decisions or who had gotten greedy about inheritance money. She was a sophisticated criminal who had been planning a long-term fraud scheme that could have destroyed multiple family members financially and emotionally. Margaret immediately advised involving federal law enforcement because the interstate movement of stolen funds and the false identification research constituted federal crimes. But she also recommended proceeding with the family meeting as planned because having Bethany's reactions and statements on record would strengthen any future prosecution. The night before the family meeting, I received an unexpected phone call from Bethany herself. Her tone was different than I had ever heard before. Not the confident, condescending voice she had used at the dinner, but something desperate and calculating. "Delilah, I have been thinking about what happened at dinner, and I think I may have been too harsh," she said carefully. "I know you have been going through a difficult time lately, and maybe I should have been more supportive instead of critical. I was wondering if we could talk privately before tomorrow's meeting and see if we can work something out that would be good for everyone." Her offer to work something out confirmed that she knew about my investigation and was attempting damage control. But her reference to my difficult time also showed that she was still planning to use the lies she had spread about my mental health and financial stability as her primary defense. I told Bethany that I appreciated her call, but that I thought it would be better to have our conversation in front of the whole family so everyone could hear both sides of the situation. Her immediate resistance to this suggestion was telling. "I do not think that would be wise," she said quickly. "Some of what I have learned about the estate situation is quite complex, and it might be confusing or upsetting for everyone to hear all the details at once. I think it would be better if you and I could reach an understanding first, and then we could present a united front to the family." Her attempt to control the narrative, even in this conversation, showed that she had not abandoned her strategy of manipulation and deception. She was still trying to position herself as the responsible family protector while suggesting that I was not capable of handling complex information appropriately. When I politely but firmly declined her offer of a private meeting, Bethany's tone shifted again. "I hope you are not planning to make any accusations tomorrow that you cannot support with solid evidence," she said coolly. "It would be very unfortunate if you damaged family relationships based on misunderstandings or incomplete information." Her veiled threat was clear. She was warning me that she would aggressively challenge any evidence I presented and would continue to portray me as unstable and unreliable. But her concern about evidence also suggested that she was not entirely confident in her ability to explain away everything I had discovered. After ending the call, I spent the evening reviewing my presentation materials one final time. Margaret and David had helped me organize everything into a clear chronological narrative that would be easy for family members to follow. We had physical evidence, financial documentation, witness testimony, and professional analysis that painted an indisputable picture of systematic theft and deception. But more importantly, we had the moral authority of seeking justice for grandmother Eleanor's memory and protecting Aunt Miriam from becoming the next victim. This was not about money or inheritance disputes. It was about stopping a pattern of elder abuse and holding criminals accountable for their actions. As I prepared for what would undoubtedly be the most difficult family confrontation of my life, I felt a strange mixture of nervousness and determination. Everything I had discovered over the past months had led to this moment. Tomorrow's meeting would determine whether justice would be served or whether Bethany and Rachel would succeed in their campaign of deception and theft. The stakes could not have been higher, not just for me personally, but for the integrity of our entire family and the safety of vulnerable elderly relatives who depended on our protection and care. The family meeting began exactly as I had planned, with all the key players assembled in Uncle Robert's living room and my evidence presentation ready to expose the truth. What I did not anticipate was that my most trusted ally would become my greatest betrayer, nearly destroying everything I had worked to accomplish. Margaret Thompson and David Walsh had arrived early and set up their recording equipment discreetly. Monica was seated near Rachel, ready to observe and potentially corroborate any admissions. Marcus had brought official bank documentation. Mrs. Patterson had her photographs organized chronologically. Everything was in place for what should have been Bethany's moment of reckoning. I began my presentation calmly and methodically, walking through the timeline of suspicious activity following grandmother's death. I showed the family the empty house photographs, the fake invoices, the pattern of unauthorized withdrawals, and the evidence of systematic asset theft. The room was silent as family members absorbed the magnitude of what I was revealing. Bethany's initial response was exactly what I had expected. She expressed shock and hurt that I would make such serious accusations against her. She claimed that every action she had taken had been in the family's best interest and that she had documentation to support all her decisions. She even managed to produce tears as she talked about how difficult it had been to handle all the estate responsibilities while dealing with her own grief. But then something happened that I had not anticipated. Marcus, my cousin, who worked at the credit union and who had agreed to support my case with official financial documentation, suddenly shifted his position completely. "I think we need to slow down here," Marcus said, interrupting my presentation. "I have been reviewing these financial records more carefully, and I think there might be some misunderstandings about what actually happened." The room fell silent as Marcus pulled out a different set of documents than the ones we had reviewed together. These transactions that Delilah is calling suspicious were actually pre-authorized by grandmother Eleanor before she passed away. I have the signed authorization forms right here. My heart sank as I realized what was happening. Marcus was producing forged documents that appeared to legitimize the financial transfers. But worse than that, he was lending his professional credibility to Bethany's defense, making it seem like my evidence had been misinterpreted or taken out of context. "Furthermore," Marcus continued, "I have to share my concern that Delilah has been under significant financial stress lately. She has been asking family members for loans and has made some questionable financial decisions. I think her accusations might be motivated by her own desperate situation rather than by actual evidence of wrongdoing." The betrayal was devastating, not just because it undermined my case, but because it revealed that Marcus had been working with Bethany all along. Every piece of financial evidence I had shared with him had been reported back to her, giving her time to prepare counter-documentation and strategy. Bethany seized on Marcus's statements immediately. "I am heartbroken that Delilah would try to destroy our family relationships because of her own financial problems," she said, her tears flowing more freely now. "I have been trying to protect everyone from the truth about her gambling debts and poor judgment, but I cannot stay silent while she makes these horrible accusations." Rachel joined the attack with perfectly timed supporting statements. "We have all been worried about Delilah's behavior lately. She has been secretive and paranoid, making wild accusations and demanding to see financial records that she has no legal right to access. I think she needs professional help, not encouragement for these delusions." The mood in the room shifted dramatically. Family members who had been listening to my evidence with concern and attention suddenly began looking at me with suspicion and pity. Uncle Robert suggested gently that perhaps I should consider counseling to help me deal with my grief and financial stress. Aunt Caroline offered to help me find resources for managing debt and addiction issues. Even worse, Margaret Thompson's presence in the room was now being portrayed as evidence of my instability rather than my thorough preparation. Bethany suggested that hiring a forensic accountant to investigate family members showed how far my paranoia had progressed and how desperately I needed intervention rather than enablement. The meeting that was supposed to expose Bethany's crimes had become an intervention focused on my alleged mental health and financial problems. Everything I had worked for over the past months was collapsing, and I found myself isolated and discredited in front of my entire family. But the most crushing blow came when Mrs. Patterson, grandmother's neighbor, who had provided crucial photographic evidence, suddenly became uncertain about what she had witnessed. "Maybe I was mistaken about what I saw," she said hesitantly. "It was dark, and I might have misunderstood what was happening. Perhaps they were just organizing things, not removing them." I realized that Mrs. Patterson had been contacted and pressured before the meeting. Someone had convinced her that her testimony could cause serious problems for innocent family members, and her natural desire to avoid conflict had made her vulnerable to manipulation. Monica, who had promised to support my case with evidence of Bethany and Rachel's private conversations, remained completely silent throughout the entire confrontation. When I looked to her for backup, she avoided eye contact and said nothing about the incriminating conversations she had overheard. As the meeting wound down, I found myself completely isolated. Every ally I had counted on had either betrayed me outright or abandoned me when the pressure increased. The family consensus was that I needed help, not that Bethany needed investigation. Several relatives offered to assist me in finding counseling services and debt management resources. Bethany's final statement was perfectly calculated to cement her victory. "I love my sister, and I want what is best for her," she said tearfully. "I hope she will accept the help that we are all offering, and that she can get the support she needs to overcome these challenges. In the meantime, I will continue to manage grandmother's estate responsibly until she is in a better position to participate in family financial matters." The meeting ended with hugs and expressions of concern for my well-being, but I knew I was leaving as a defeated and discredited family member. Bethany had not only successfully defended against my accusations, but had turned the entire situation into evidence of my own instability and dishonesty. David Walsh approached me quietly as the family dispersed. "This is not over," he whispered. "They made some serious mistakes today, and we now have them on record making statements that contradict other evidence. Do not give up." But in that moment, sitting alone in Uncle Robert's living room while my family discussed my need for professional help, I felt like the fight was over and that Bethany had won completely. She had successfully maintained her fraud while destroying my credibility and isolating me from family support. The week following the disastrous family meeting was the darkest period of my entire life. I had lost not just the battle to expose Bethany's crimes, but seemingly my entire family's trust and respect. The isolation was overwhelming, and I began to question whether I had somehow misunderstood or misinterpreted the evidence I had gathered. But David Walsh refused to let me surrender to despair. "Professional criminals make mistakes when they think they have won," he told me during a meeting at his office 3 days after the family confrontation. "Bethany and her accomplices made several critical errors during that meeting, and we now have opportunities that we did not have before." David had been analyzing the recording of the family meeting, and he had discovered something that changed everything. The authorization documents that Marcus had produced to legitimize the financial transfers contained a fatal flaw that exposed the entire conspiracy. "These documents are dated 2 weeks after your grandmother's death," David explained, showing me a detailed analysis of the paperwork. "Marcus claimed these were pre-authorizations signed by Eleanor before she passed away, but the dates prove that they were created after her death. That makes them not just invalid, but evidence of forgery and conspiracy." Even more damaging, David's forensic analysis of the documents revealed that they had been created using computer software and printing techniques that were not available when the signatures were supposedly obtained. The paper watermarks and ink composition were inconsistent with documents from the time period when Eleanor was allegedly signing authorizations. But David had uncovered something even more significant during his investigation of Marcus's role in the conspiracy. Marcus is not just helping them cover up the crime, David told me. He is actively participating in ongoing theft through his position at the credit union. David had discovered that Marcus had been creating false loan documents and manipulating account records to hide the trail of stolen money. He had also been using his access to customer financial information to help Bethany and Rachel identify other elderly clients who might be vulnerable to similar schemes. This revelation meant that we were not just dealing with family estate theft, but with a criminal conspiracy that involved bank fraud and potentially dozens of elderly victims. The scope of the crimes had escalated far beyond what anyone in the family had imagined. "We need to involve federal law enforcement immediately," David advised. "This is now a multi-state conspiracy involving bank fraud, elder abuse, and systematic financial crimes. The local family drama has become a major criminal investigation." But before we could contact federal authorities, David received a phone call that transformed our understanding of the entire situation. The call came from someone I had never expected to hear from: Bethany's ex-husband, James Morrison, who had been divorced from her for over 5 years. "I have been following the situation with your family through mutual friends," James told David during their conversation. "I think you need to know that this is not the first time Bethany has done something like this. She destroyed my family's finances during our marriage, and I have been documenting her criminal activities for years." James agreed to meet with us immediately, and what he revealed was staggering. Bethany had been running sophisticated financial scams for over a decade, targeting elderly relatives, vulnerable family friends, and even her own husband's family members. James had divorce records, court documents, and personal evidence of multiple previous crimes. "During our marriage, Bethany systematically stole from my elderly grandmother using many of the same techniques she used with your grandmother Eleanor," James explained. "She gained access to financial accounts through false authorizations, sold family heirlooms without permission, and manipulated family members into believing that I was the one with financial problems." James had boxes of documentation proving Bethany's criminal history, including evidence that she had defrauded his grandmother of over $200,000. He also had proof that Marcus and Rachel had been involved in that scheme as well, establishing a pattern of conspiracy that went back years. "I tried to prosecute her during the divorce proceedings, but she had manipulated my family so successfully that no one would believe me," James continued. "She had convinced everyone that I was abusive and financially irresponsible, and she used those lies to escape consequences for her crimes." But James had never stopped investigating, and he had been building a case against Bethany for years. He had financial records recordings of incriminating conversations and even evidence that she had been planning to target my family specifically after learning about grandmother Eleanor's substantial estate. "She had been researching your family's financial situation for over 2 years before your grandmother passed away," James revealed. "She knew exactly how much money was involved and had already identified the family members who would be easiest to manipulate and those who would be most likely to ask questions." James also provided the missing piece of the puzzle regarding Marcus's betrayal. "Marcus was not recruited recently," he explained. "He has been working with Bethany since before your grandmother's death. His position at the credit union was specifically chosen to give them access to financial information and the ability to manipulate banking records." This information completely reframed everything that had happened. The family meeting had not been a spontaneous defense against my accusations. It had been a carefully orchestrated performance designed to neutralize the threat I represented. Every ally who had betrayed me had been compromised or recruited long before I had approached them. James had also been in contact with federal investigators who were already investigating similar elder fraud schemes in our region. "There is a task force specifically focused on family-based financial crimes," he told us. "They have been looking for victims and witnesses who can help them build cases against organized elder abuse networks." Within hours of James contacting the task force, federal agents were reviewing our evidence and beginning a formal investigation. The scope and sophistication of Bethany's criminal operation had caught their attention, particularly because it involved bank employee participation in multi-state activities. Agent Sarah Rodriguez, the lead investigator on the case, explained that our evidence was exactly what they needed to pursue federal charges. "This type of family-based elder fraud is becoming increasingly common and sophisticated," she told us. Your documentation and Mr. Morrison's historical evidence could help us stop a criminal network that has been operating for years. But Agent Rodriguez also had a strategic request that would require tremendous courage from me. We need to gather additional evidence of ongoing criminal activity, she explained. That means we need you to continue interacting with your family as if nothing has changed while wearing recording equipment and documenting any further attempts at manipulation or theft. The prospect of returning to family interactions after the humiliation of the meeting was terrifying, but I realized that this was my opportunity to not only clear my name, but to prevent future victims from being harmed by Bethany's criminal network. James agreed to provide ongoing support and to share his expertise about Bethany's methods in psychology. She is extremely dangerous because she is so skilled at manipulation, he warned me. But she is also overconfident now because she thinks she has won. That overconfidence will be her downfall. As I prepared to re-engage with my family as an undercover witness for the federal investigation, I felt a mixture of fear and determination unlike anything I had ever experienced. The personal stakes had evolved into something much larger, the possibility of stopping a criminal enterprise that had been harming vulnerable elderly victims for years. The federal investigation moved with breathtaking speed once Agent Rodriguez had our complete evidence package and James Morrison's historical documentation. Within 2 weeks of my disastrous family meeting, Bethany, Rachel, and Marcus were arrested simultaneously in a coordinated operation that prevented them from destroying evidence or fleeing to avoid prosecution. The arrests happened on a Tuesday morning at 6 a.m. Bethany was taken into custody at her home while federal agents executed search warrants that revealed the full scope of her criminal operation. They found detailed plans for defrauding additional elderly relatives, fake identification documents, and evidence of offshore bank accounts containing hundreds of thousands of dollars stolen from multiple victims. Rachel was arrested at her workplace where she had been using her position in a senior care facility to identify vulnerable elderly clients for potential fraud schemes. The FBI discovered that she had been passing confidential financial information about residents to Bethany and Marcus, creating a pipeline of potential victims. Marcus's arrest at the credit union was particularly dramatic because it exposed the institutional corruption that had made their scheme possible. Federal banking regulators discovered that he had been manipulating records for dozens of elderly clients, stealing money from accounts, and covering the thefts with false documentation. The local news coverage was extensive, but what mattered most to me was the immediate transformation in my family's understanding of what had really happened. When federal agents contacted relatives to inform them about the arrests and explain the evidence, the elaborate lies that had been constructed around my credibility and mental health collapsed instantly. Uncle Robert called me within hours of learning about the arrests, his voice heavy with guilt and remorse. "Delilah, I owe you the most profound apology of my life," he said. "We all failed you terribly, and we enabled criminals to continue harming vulnerable people because we chose to believe lies instead of investigating the truth." Aunt Caroline's apology was even more emotional. I kept thinking about how proud Grandmother Eleanor was of Bethany's responsibility and success. She told me through tears. It never occurred to me that those signs of success might actually be evidence of theft from Eleanor herself. "I am so sorry we did not listen to you." The family gathering that occurred the weekend after the arrests was unlike any reunion we had ever had. Instead of the usual casual conversations and shared meals, we spent hours processing the magnitude of what had happened and acknowledging how thoroughly we had been manipulated. Mrs. Patterson grandmother's neighbor was particularly upset about how she had been pressured to change her testimony. "They told me that if I insisted on my story about the furniture removal, I might accidentally send innocent family members to prison," she explained. "They made me feel like speaking the truth would be cruel and destructive." Monica finally revealed the full extent of what she had witnessed and overheard, including detailed conversations about plans to defraud Aunt Miriam and discussions about how to discredit me if I became suspicious. "I was terrified of my own sister," she admitted. "Rachel had convinced me that challenging her would destroy our entire family. But the most important outcome of the arrests was the protection it provided for Aunt Miriam and other potential victims. Federal investigators discovered that Bethany and Rachel had already begun the preliminary stages of gaining access to Aunt Miriam's finances and had identified at least 6 other elderly relatives and family friends as potential targets. The financial recovery process was complex but ultimately successful. Margaret Thompson worked with federal authorities and civil courts to trace and recover the stolen assets. Grandmother's antiques were located and returned to the family. The money that had been stolen was recovered from various accounts and investments where it had been hidden. Even more satisfying was learning about the criminal penalties that Bethany, Rachel, and Marcus received. Because their crimes crossed state lines and involved bank fraud, they faced federal charges that carried significant prison sentences. Bethany received 12 years in federal prison. Rachel received 8 years, and Marcus received 10 years, plus permanent disbarment from working in financial institutions. The civil lawsuits that followed allowed our family to recover not just the stolen money, but also damages for the emotional harm and family disruption that had been caused. More importantly, the legal proceedings established a public record of their crimes that would prevent them from targeting future victims after their release from prison. But beyond the legal justice, the experience fundamentally transformed our family relationships in positive ways that I had never anticipated. The crisis had revealed how easily we could be manipulated when we did not communicate openly with each other, and how dangerous it was to accept someone's version of events without verification. We established new family protocols for financial transparency and decision-making that would prevent similar manipulation in the future. Any major financial decisions involving elderly family members would now require multiple family members to be involved and would include professional oversight to ensure that vulnerable relatives were protected. The experience also brought me closer to family members who had previously been distant or superficial relationships. James Morrison became not just an ally, but a genuine friend who understood the psychological impact of Bethany's manipulation. David Walsh and Margaret Thompson became trusted family advisors who continued to help us navigate complex financial and legal matters. Most importantly, I discovered inner strength and resilience that I had not known I possessed. Standing up to family pressure and social manipulation while maintaining my commitment to truth and justice had taught me valuable lessons about courage and integrity that would serve me for the rest of my life. The final chapter of this story came 6 months later when we held a memorial service for grandmother Eleanor that truly honored her memory and values. We shared stories about her genuine kindness and generosity, her hard work and sacrifice for our family, and her belief in treating people with honesty and respect. As I stood in the garden where grandmother had taught me to plant flowers as a child, I realized that exposing Bethany's crimes had not just been about recovering stolen money or achieving a personal vindication. It had been about protecting the values and relationships that grandmother Eleanor had worked her entire life to build and preserve. The experience taught me that family is not just about blood relationships or traditional loyalties. True family consists of people who support each other's growth and well-being, who stand up for truth and justice even when it is difficult, and who choose love and integrity over convenience and comfort. Today, our family is smaller but stronger. We have deeper relationships built on genuine trust and communication rather than superficial pleasantries and assumed loyalties. We have systems in place to protect our elderly members from financial predators, and we have learned to verify important information rather than simply accepting what we are told. Looking back on this entire experience, I am grateful that I chose to take notes instead of seeking immediate revenge when Bethany publicly humiliated me at that family dinner. Patience and careful documentation proved far more powerful than anger or retaliation. Justice served through proper channels was ultimately more satisfying and effective than any personal revenge could have been. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? Have you ever had to choose between keeping family peace and standing up for what you know is right? How do you think you would handle discovering that someone close to you had been systematically lying and stealing from vulnerable family members? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let me know if you have similar stories about family drama and justice being served. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family betrayal and finding strength in difficult situations. Share this video with anyone who has experienced family manipulation or elder abuse. because sometimes knowing that you are not alone in these experiences can make all the difference. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that truth and justice may take time to prevail, but they are always worth fighting for.